Good morning, ladies and gents. You're going to hear a bell interrupt us here, and that's okay. So I'll pause if and when that happens. Today, we're going to look at our first video lesson for the fourth 9 weeks, narrative writing 2.0. Because it's 2.0, we're going to go a lot faster because all of these videos you did in the first 9 weeks. We're going to focus on the following essential questions. Question number 2, who are the likely readers and audience of this form of writing? 3, how do I make my story more interesting to my readers? And 4, what kind of organization could be used in this form of writing? We're going to carry into our organizational learning target packet this 9 weeks. And we're going to focus on the following organizational learning targets right now. We're going to look at use a plot diagram to organize your narrative in a logical and chronological order. What that means is you want your story, your narrative, to have a clear beginning, a middle, and an end. It should go chronologically ordered, and it should center around a clear and specific conflict that begins, that has an exciting moment in the middle, and then that ends. We call that the plot structure. Exposition is where you learn about your character setting and conflict. Rising action is that building of the conflict. The climax is where that conflict reaches its peak. Falling action, the conflict starts to lessen, and then the resolution, which is where the conflict is gone and in fact ends. We set it up as sort of a triangle that has a really long side here because the rising action usually takes a while. That leads us into resolution, which is that final concluding section where the conflict resolves fully and is gone. That is part of your organizational structure. It's learning target number 3, to create a conclusion or resolution that connects to the events in your narrative and serves as a clear resolution to your conflict. We talked in the first 9 weeks how that means whether it's positive or negative, the conflict must end. If you call something a cliffhanger, but really you're just stopping your story before you end your conflict, that's not a cliffhanger ending. That, my friend, is a part of a story and not a full story with a clear resolution. You're missing your resolution. So make sure that you don't get lazy and that you get through that entire plot structure from the exposition through the rising action and climax, down through the falling action, and your conflict ends with the resolution. Again, it could be a good, happy ending or a sad, bad, scary, whatever ending, but that conflict must end with the resolution. As we continue thinking about that, today I want to review briefly 3 different learning targets for the content section. But before we do so, I'm going to just show you a mapped out, brainstormed plot structure for you to kind of look at here. This is a story that was called, I think Rosanna actually is the name of it. It was written by a professional author, but I mapped it out for you here as a pretend brainstorm for an actual story. So within this story, the exposition, we have our character Rosanna being confronted by a bully who says he's going to hold her down and kiss her, basically. And as she gets in this confrontation, it freaks her out a bit. And then she heads to this gentleman who says that he can make lies become true. And so she wants to make a lie that the bully should stay away from her because her brother's really tough and he's going to beat her up. But unfortunately, that isn't true. So she sees this gentleman who can potentially make her lie become true. Then her brother does become actually a tough guy, but unfortunately, he starts to bully her and gets into the side of the bully who initially started bothering her to begin with. As the plot begins to unravel in the falling action, the character who let her make the lie allows her to make a new one. And so she makes up a new lie. Her brother becomes back to normal. And that new lie is that she becomes the strongest girl in the world. And as she becomes the strongest girl in the world, she's able to successfully defend herself against that bully. And that's how the conflict of Rosanna's bully is resolved. Notice how this is a very brief plot structure, and the detail and all that would go into the actual story, but it's a great way to brainstorm to make sure that your story centers around a complete and full beginning, middle, and end plot. Whether it's a made up story like this one where lies can become true, or a real, in fact, non fictional story that is an event that actually happened to you, maybe with a real bully that you're able to somehow, overcome your differences with. That needs to be set up in a clear plot structure, logical order, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, and it should center around a conflict. Notice how I said in a nonfictional narrative, you might have a conflict that you're dealing with a bully in your own life. It's a nonfictional narrative, but it has a clear conflict. So don't just tell me about a trip to Cancun. We need to have one clear conflict reaching through both nonfiction and fictional narratives. In the content learning targets today, I want to focus on context. Context is what you create whenever you're starting that story off, but it does carry over throughout. Context is that background environment. It's describing the setting, the surroundings. It's being specific and detailed in your conflict. It's fully communicating the aspects of conflict, character, and setting throughout the piece. By describing and being a good descriptor of that conflict and that setting, you're going to embed your reader into the story. So you want to make sure you're not just focused on the conflict, although conflict is important. You want to make the reader feel like they're in fact in your story by giving us those environment, setting, details that helps us feel immersed into the environment of your story. So make sure that you're clearly communicating the setting throughout your context of the piece so that the reader feels like they are in fact part of and in the story and in the action of your story. Final two areas I want to talk about is when you introduce your characters in your narrative. Learning target content number 4. We want to introduce our characters by 4 different features. We talk about their personality traits. We talk about their feelings and emotions, their physical traits, and then their motives. Remember, motive is the reason why a character acts the way they do. The reasoning why they're choosing to act behind they do. And in my story about Rosanna, her motive was because she was afraid of getting hurt by the bully and she didn't want to be treated poorly by the bully. That was her motive behind why she goes to make a lie. So you want to make sure that you give your characters personality traits. You want to make sure you can tell when your characters are happy, sad, playful, energetic. You want to make sure that you tie in those feelings and emotions with their personality traits. The one big thing that I feel a lot of people forget is to figure out a way to give those physical traits, not in a tacked-in way, but in a natural way that sort of works. As you're describing through the plot of your story, where are you going to take the time to sort of talk about and give your character those physical traits? What color hair does your character have? What color eyes does your character have? How tall or short are your character? What is the age of your character? All of those things tie in to the physical traits of your character. So make sure you're thinking about all 4 features of introducing characters as you write in these really cool dynamic characters in your story that are relatable. The last thing you have to consider as you're brainstorming, as you're thinking about that plot diagram and the elements of character, the elements of what's your setting going to look like, the elements of how you're going to create that conflict in that world, you also need to consider what is that message? What is that purpose, that overarching big idea? Yes, narratives are meant to entertain, but they also should have a clear theme or message. Common themes are good triumphs over evil or love conquers all, but you could come up with a theme of your choosing, and that whole plot obviously should sort of center around the message that you're trying to convey in your piece. In the story about Rosanna, that theme could very well be one of those common ones of good triumphs over evil, in the sense of, being able to overcome a mean person and a bully in a mean situation. So that is something that's very relatable. Themes are universal and they're relatable to your audience. So as you're developing your plot structure, as you're determining how it's going to begin, how it's going to get to a climax, and how that conflict is going to finally be resolved at the end, you want to really consider your characters. Who are they? How do they look? How do they feel? Why are they acting the way they do? You want to consider, what is a theme? How can my audience learn some sort of message from this piece and have some sort of takeaway from my story that goes beyond my story itself? As well as, how can I establish and make my reader feel like they're really in this story, so that they feel like they're walking around in the world of my story by establishing that clear context through really cool setting details and creating a nice environment for your story. So that is a lot, but we covered this already in the first 9 weeks, and so it's mainly just a quick review. So go ahead and get working.